Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining my live lesson and welcome. Let me just share my screen before we start. I hope you can see that. So thank you so much for joining. In this lesson, I want to talk to you about speaking, and it's one of the most common questions that I get from English learners. How do I improve my speaking? So we're going to talk about some practical ways in which you can get better at speaking English, even if you don't have anyone to talk to. So I'm going to start by sharing with you a free checklist that has 13 practical activities that you can do at home. And I'm going to paste that in the chat so you can have a look. And if you're watching the replay of this video, then the link is in the video description. So you can get that and start practicing. The next thing we're going to do is I'm going to explain some practical activities. So I'm going to focus on 4 different activities that you can do to improve your spoken English. Then I'm going to discuss some common problems that people have when they speak English, and I'm going to offer some solutions to you as well. And I'm going to try and answer your questions as well at the end. So if you haven't met me before, my name is Aga. I am a CELTA certified English teacher. I have a BA in English literature and an MA in language, culture and history. And I'm particularly interested in grammar, as you may know from my YouTube channel, but I'm also interested in helping people speak better English. So if you're not subscribed to my channel, make sure you do that, and let's get this lesson started. So make sure you get the free checklist, which I have included in the chat, and also I'm going to add it in the video description if you're watching the recording. So in the chat, I would like you to tell me where you're from and what is your biggest problem when speaking English. I will be really interested in hearing your feedback and your thoughts, and this will help me improve my content that I offer to you. So let's start with speaking activities. The first activity I want to encourage you to try to improve your English is describing your actions. So what do I mean by that? So when you're going about your day at home, use every opportunity to practice speaking. So describe to yourself, what are you doing? What does it look like? And what is your opinion? And here's what I mean. So imagine you're making lunch. You can use it to practice some speaking. So for example, you can say to yourself, I'm making a sandwich. I'm opening the fridge. I'm looking for butter and cheese. So you're describing your actions just to practice. What does it look like? So take something that you can see when you're doing this action and describe it. The bread is crispy. The butter is in a plastic box. So this is just an opportunity to use everyday activities to practice speaking. And the next question is, what's your opinion? So you can also talk about opinions whilst you're doing this activity. For example, I don't normally like cheese, but this cheese is different. It's very tasty. I can see many of you are joining in the chat and saying hello, so I'm just going to say hello to all of you and thanks again for joining. The second activity I want to share with you is describing your day. So at the end of the day, you can sit down and you can talk to yourself about what you did that day. So the aim of this activity is to practice using past tenses. For example, you can say what you did, what happened, how you felt. For example, I got up early this morning. I didn't have time to have breakfast, so I went straight to work. I got hungry around 10 o'clock, so I popped out to get a snack. So this is just you telling the story of your day. Thank you so much for your comments in the chat. Let me just look at those questions at the end, and I will offer you some advice then. So just a reminder to download your free checklist from the chat. I'm going to paste the link here again, but you've got a list there with 13 speaking activities you can do at home to improve your spoken English. So let me just take one of the questions from the chat. When we don't know what to say in English, how can we practice? So try saying very simple things. When you're describing your day or describing your activities, you can really start small and just say very basic, very simple, and very short sentences just to practice and do it. You can do it every day for 5 minutes. And as you do it more, you will become more confident. Okay, so somebody's saying they usually describe your day by using simple past. Yes, you can use the past simple to talk about what you did, like in the example I gave you. You can also use other tenses if appropriate. So the next activity is repeating the same story until it's easy. So this technique is about saying the same thing over and over again to get used to what it sounds like. So the story of your day, for example, you can write it down if it's easier at first. So come up with the story, write it down, read it, and then say it, and then repeat it over and over again until it's very easy. So this is a great way to become familiar with the language, and to make sure that you become more confident. And the final technique in this part of the lesson, because I am going to give you more advice, but I just want to focus on another technique, which is what I call stock phrases. So stock phrases are phrases that you can use in any conversation, in different situations. For example, here's one category of stock phrases: reacting to news. So when somebody tells you some news, for example, I got a new job, or I'm having a baby, or I went to see a really interesting film at the weekend. These are different ways in which you can react to those news. So you can say, that's fantastic. You can say, I'm so happy for you. Or you can say, I'm sorry to hear that, if it's not good news. Or that's awful, if it's a story about something unpleasant. So think of different phrases like that for reacting to something somebody is telling you, and write them down and practice them, learn them off by heart so that you've got them ready. Because often what people tell me is you're having a conversation and somebody is telling you something, but you don't know what to do. You're stuck. You don't know what to say. And having those stock phrases allows you to jump in and just speak. And once you've said something, it's so much easier to continue. So here's some more examples of stock phrases. Phrases for expressing what you think, your opinion. That's really interesting. I find it incredibly boring. I really enjoy something. I'm not a big fan of something. So these are different ways to say what you think about something. So again, these will be useful in any conversation. Let me just have a quick look at the questions. that you're posting in the chat. Is it useful to practice tongue twisters? I would say probably not, but it's your personal preference that counts. So if you think it's useful, that's fine. But I wouldn't think it's particularly useful. I've got a question from Annette from Germany. Hello, Annette. You can read a lot in English and understand, but as soon as I have to formulate English sentences, my brain freezes. This is a very common problem, and I'm actually going to give you some advice on that in a minute. I was planning on doing that. So let me just move on with my presentation, and then we can get to that. Oh, there we go. Problem 1. That's your problem, Annette. I can't remember words. So it's a very common thing, and I've got a few different solutions to that. So the first solution is using an English dictionary. So whenever you are learning new words or new phrases in English, don't just check the translation in your language. Instead, use a monolingual dictionary. For example, the Macmillan Dictionary or the Oxford English Dictionary, it gives you a definition. And that is just a nice way to incorporate a little bit of learning into looking up new words. Each time you check a word, find at least 3 examples of sentences to use that word, and write them down, and then come up with your own sentences as well, so that you've got a few examples of sentences using that word. And then make sure that when you revise, when you're learning and trying to remember the word, you go back to your sentences as well. So that way you're learning how to use the word in a conversation. And if you do this more and more, you will associate the word with the examples, and it will be easier for you to remember the word. If you just check the translation in German, that's fine. You know what it means, but you will forget it very quickly. So examples and repetition, looking at the examples over and over again, that is a good thing. And I think also doing the activities that I mentioned earlier, like describing your actions, describing your day, this all counts. So there is no magic solution. It's just about practicing and doing it over and over again. I hope this is helpful. We've got another question. How do I develop my confidence? Sorry, just going back to dictionaries, because I can see a question from Alexander. Why not the Google Dictionary? Yes, that's great too. I use that all the time. If I'm looking anything up, that is really a good idea. So developing your confidence, I'm going to give you some advice on my next slide, because that was actually problem number 2 I was going to discuss. I'm too shy to speak. Who has this problem? Tell me in the chat. And if you're watching this video recording, then just answer this question now. Do you ever feel too shy? This is a very common problem. So one solution I've got for you is the stock phrases technique that I mentioned earlier. So learning phrases that you can use to react to what somebody tells you, because it's kind of like an automatic way to react. You don't have to come up with anything. You just have a list of 5 things that you can say in any situation. So that is one solution. And the other solution is something I mentioned in the free checklist, which I have shared with you in the chat and in the video description. It's called pretend interviews. Let's call it that way. So this basically is about pretending that you are somebody famous. So you can choose a real famous person, or you can just pretend that you are famous in whatever it is that you do, and that you're giving an interview on TV. And usually when famous people give interviews, they talk about their life, their childhood, their education, their experience, some anecdotes or funny stories that happened. They talk about their everyday life, what they like to do, what they don't like to do, how they like to work. So think about all those different things that you can say in an interview, and just spend 10 minutes preparing for the interview and then actually practicing by speaking to yourself. So that is one way to do it. And the final thing I didn't actually include on the slide, but I want to mention when it comes to confidence is just remember that when somebody is talking to you, they are interested in you. They're not interested in how you speak or what language you use. They are interested in communicating. So I think that is like a mindset shift that you need whenever you're speaking a foreign language, to not constantly think that you're being judged. So I hope this is helpful. And then I've got another question. Alexander has the opposite problem, speaking too much, making mistakes. It's not a problem, I would say. I think it's a really good thing. And I have met many people who have very good English on paper, but they can't speak. And I have met many people whose English is very, very basic, but they can speak fluently. So there are two sides to language learning. There's fluency and there's accuracy. So you need a bit of both. You need a bit of accuracy. You need to know the rules. You need to say things correctly. And you also need fluency. So you need the confidence to actually speak. So you need to balance both of them. And I think fluency is great because you are practicing, you're making mistakes, especially when you realize that you've made a mistake. That is a great opportunity to improve. So it's not a problem at all. Right. So let me just quickly move on to the next problem before I move on to your questions. Problem number 3, I don't sound natural. And I think that is probably a very common problem until you get to the advanced level. So most people have this problem. And how to solve it is, my first tip is reading loads. So using every opportunity to read in English. And it doesn't have to be novels. It can be one paragraph of a news story on the BBC News or another news website. Reading anything. So if you're thinking of making something new for dinner, look up the recipe in English instead of in your language. Reading the weather forecast or anything that you would do anyway, try to do it in English. But don't just read. It's very important to focus on collocations. So when you're reading, whenever you see a group of words that just sounds natural, like the phrase incredibly interesting, these two words just sound natural together. Highlight them, write them down. So instead of focusing on individual words, focus on groups of words and highlight those groups and write them down in a notebook. It really helps. And the final thing about sounding natural is phrasal verbs. And I know you probably don't like this tip, because who likes phrasal verbs, right? They're very difficult to learn for most people. But they're very important because they're not just for informal speech. They come up all the time. They come up at work. They come up in the news. They come up in, formal documents and things like that. So focus a bit of time each week to learn a couple of new phrasal verbs and idioms. So that is also something that you will come across when reading in English. Right, let's see what other questions we've got there in the chat. So there's a question about having nobody to talk to, and that is exactly what my checklist is for. So let me just paste the checklist in the chat again. So if you've got nobody to talk to, look at the list of 13 activities I've included in this checklist, and you can do all of these things at home every week. So just if you've got 10 minutes every day, just spend 10 minutes doing one activity, and that will really make a difference. Right. So there's a question about tenses. So tenses is something that I cover a lot in my English grammar membership. So if you go to my website, englishwithaga.com, you will be able to see the English grammar membership, which has lots of different courses about English tenses. So it's all covered there. But it's a good foundation in terms of, learning tenses, because it allows you to talk about whatever you want. The present, the past, the future, it's the foundation of language, really. So it is very important. Yes, so correction. So somebody mentioned, how do you get feedback? Well, it's not, obviously you're not going to get feedback if you're doing it by yourself. But so the only way I can offer feedback personally, I do read my social media comments and I reply as much as possible, but obviously it's not possible for me to reply to every single person, unfortunately. But in the grammar membership, members can ask questions in the forum, and I can reply to those. So you can have a look on my website as well if you're interested in getting feedback. Okay, so let's move on. Your questions, that's the next slide. So I whizzed through this presentation. I hope it was useful. I hope you got something out of it. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them now in the chat. I will be here for another few minutes if you need any help. I can see there's a question from Saddam about mistakes. Yes, that is a very common problem. When you make a mistake and you become aware of it, you can become really self-conscious about making mistakes. And I think that is probably the biggest obstacle that prevents people from speaking freely. But I think if you don't make mistakes, that means you haven't tried, right? So I think it's better to try, make the mistakes, and then when you become aware of them, just try to concentrate on studying that particular problem. Next time you're learning English, and try and improve it next time. I know it's easier said than done, but I think if you just do a lot of practice, do a lot of reading, learning collocations, learning idioms, and doing some of the practical activities I mentioned, it all adds up. How many times a month are you planning to stream? So I'm going to be doing this probably twice a month. The next one I'm thinking of doing actually next week, and it's going to be a lesson about prepositions, a bit more practical, because this is more like me talking to you and giving you advice. I know it's not very interactive or practical, but the next one will be about prepositions, and there will be some opportunities for you to do a bit of practice or answering some questions. There are also a couple of live videos on my channel that I streamed last month. One is about tenses and common mistakes. One is about tenses, and the other one is about common mistakes that people make. So make sure you check it out in the live section of my channel. How to remember grammar rules. Oh, that's a tricky one. I think you only really need to remember rules if you want to be an English teacher, because I wouldn't focus on remembering the rules. I would focus on, once you understand it, try and make lots of sentences and just try and put this knowledge into practice straight away. So just take one little rule and then try and make as many sentences as you can using that rule. And that way you just practice using it rather than remembering the rule itself. I hope this was helpful. Right, so I'm just going to remind you of the checklist. I hope you will find that useful as well. And otherwise, thank you so much for joining. And if you have any other comments or anything that you'd like to ask me, then feel free to post that in the chat or on the comments on the video. And I will try and do another live or make a video about those topics soon. But thank you so much for joining, and I hope you found it useful, and I will see you in the next one, hopefully.